Thank you, Christine, Professor Marine, for your introduction and for having me in your class. And I would also like to thank Professor Constantine, the Vice Provost, and the students of the Bucharest University of Economic Studies for attending this talk. Studies and some significant research work that has been done by the World Economic Forum, the McKinsey Global Initiative, the American Marketing Association, the Fuqua School of Business in Duke University, and in my parent university of University of Pennsylvania at the Wharton School. I will provide some of the links at the bottom of this, at the end of this presentation. So let's take a look at, quickly examine some of the major impacts of the pandemic on business and do a little bit of crystal ball gazing into what the future may look like, at least in these select areas. So the pandemic's impact on the supply chain has been well documented. Even after almost 2 years, shortages in critical components, especially in computer chips, have severely disrupted manufacturing all over the globe. Major ports in the US, as you may have read, especially in the LA area, have been choked with huge ships carrying tens of thousands of containers that are yet to reach their intended destination. And unfortunately, this situation is likely to continue, at least in the foreseeable future. The second major area of impact is on human resources. So a huge number of people all over the world, and especially in the Western countries, have left their jobs in what has come to be termed as the Great Resignation to do something else. So it has forced us, both from the employee as well as from the employer point of view, to rethink the entire concept of work and how and where and how it should be performed. We will also take a quick look at what the future holds for marketing specifically, and then we'll conclude with a brief overview of the risks and opportunities that the post-pandemic era presents. The biggest disruption, as I mentioned, that the pandemic has caused to business is the breakdown in the supply chain. While disruptions to the supply chain is not really a completely new phenomenon, what sets apart the current crisis is that it has affected, probably for one of the first time, the last instance I could recall was maybe in 2008, but not to this extent, was that it has affected both the supply as well as the demand side. So in the past, for example, whenever supply chains were disturbed, it was as it happened after the 2011 Japanese earthquake. The disruptions were largely happened from the supply side. Last year, in 2020, however, the hit was both on the supply as well as on the demand side. Now, as mentioned, the impact of supply chain has never been as severe as the current one. The so-called bullwhip effect, which is a term used to describe the cascading effect of the inconsistencies in supply and demand, that has been felt throughout the supply chain and now spans all over the world. A survey by the MGI, the McKinsey Global Initiative, had revealed that 94% of the top Fortune 1000 companies had felt the adverse impact of the supply chain disruption. The disruption in the supply chain has prompted many countries now to revisit and review their existing supply chain mechanism. For the past 20 or 30 years, the emphasis has always been to expand. We always had the globalization mantra, and which is materials from the cheapest and the most economic, manufacturing locations. Now there is a growing tendency to shift manufacturing close to demand source. This is not going to happen overnight, by the way. It does not mean that Western countries, especially the United States, is going to flee China and start manufacturing at home. It's not going to happen. However, it does mean that there is more serious exploration of what is possible to make locally than outsourcing everything almost by default, as is to happen at least in the past 10 to 15 years. Further, there is going to be growing diversification of sources than putting all eggs in a single basket. Another trend that is to go away from the current model of mass production and move to more customization, but by the consumer. As many of you have read in economics, the supply side economics is basically produce a lot, put it in the shelves, and people will buy. Now that model is being revisited. Volkswagen, for instance, has openly announced that it will allow customers to pre-order the customized vehicles. As you know, the otherwise called the bespoke manufacturing as per the customer specification, rather than just a cookie cutter product that people will buy. And this is they're going to introduce in all segments rather than just the luxury segments as is to happen. So using cutting edge simulations and predictive modeling, it is now possible for companies to have more accurately gauge consumer demand and sentiments. And the hope is that this will cut down on accumulating excess inventory and decrease the pressure on the supply chain. And then also another instance that is a very significant trend in supply chain logistics is that larger companies are now trying to involve themselves more directly in every part of the supply chain, what we call every node of the supply chain, especially in transportation. Amazon, for instance, has started its own ocean freight business and has already manufactured about 10,000 containers. Now, these are stuff that they never used to do themselves. They used to always hire transportation companies to do it for them. But now they are actually owning ships and they already had planes. Now they are adding ocean freights. Other big retailers in US like Walmart and IKEA have also followed suit. The idea is that the more nodes in the supply chain that they can control, the faster they can respond in a crisis situation. Finally, and perhaps the most significantly, is that there is now a conscious effort to map where all the key elements of the supply chain is located. So in the current system, even in the best software, the SAP system, the manufacturing source can often be traced back at best to the company headquarters. That's where the checks are going, and not necessarily to the manufacturing units. Now, thanks to the new Internet of Things, the IoT technology, it is now possible to identify the exact location of every node in the supply chain system. So overall, the supply chain is likely to be much more sophisticated and yet much more transparent. It will also be much more diversified. And so there are, the companies or the businesses will have options in case one part of the chain collapses. And this has become to the work, reimagining work. This is for us as social scientists, this is a very important area, and this is across the board. So the most profound and perhaps the most long-lasting impact of the pandemic is on work, the workplace, and the worker. The pandemic has resulted in a paradigm shift, and not only in the way that work is conducted, but also how workers viewed work. McKinsey and Company, after an extensive global study, has predicted that about more than 100 million jobs between now, 2020 and 2030, 100 million workers will change their occupations by 2030. Now, this is a huge number. And so it's essentially, it is clear that it can never be back to business as usual, even after the current fear of the pandemic virus is over. And the office space that we know has changed forever. The post-pandemic workplace, as we have already seen, is going to be much more distributed. A large segment of the workforce will be primarily working from home with only occasional attendance at a physical worksite. Using technology to make agile decision-making will be a major focus area. Business software such as IBM's Watson and other data analytical tools will play a very crucial, a much more vital role. They already integrated into large businesses, but they will be having much more vital role in decision-making. It will no longer just be the concern of the IT department or some few techies in the organization to be involved in this. In fact, a significant part of our current workforce will be expected to be involved and actually use it. There will also be an emphasis on reskilling of work. For example, a traveling salesperson will probably spend as much time before a computer as he or she does on the road. A real estate business will have to use more augmented reality tools to offer virtual visits to potential buyers. So all this will mean that a substantial expansion of the digital infrastructure of companies and organizations in order to carry the burden of business. For many businesses, the cutting edge digital technology will now be a necessity rather than just nice to have. So a culture of adaptability, all these adds up to the theme that finally a culture of adaptability and embracing the change fostered by these technologies will be paramount. The organizations must provide physical and often psychological support to workers as they make a transition to to a more technology-driven workplace. So I will lightly touch upon marketing because that's my area. So I just wanted to give you a slight flavor of what's the impact on marketing is going to be. So marketing, like other aspects of the business, will be impacted significantly. It has been. It's already the trend. If you have been following marketing trends in the last year or so, there's been a significant change. Now, the customer journey as we know it will be significantly different in a digital environment. And there are likely to be much more virtual customer touch points than physical ones. The quality of customer experiences with artificial intelligence, AI-driven customer support facilities like chatbots, etc., will see it will see much more focus. There'll be marked improvement in this quality of these with these tools. Already we have seen Google chatbots like Google Duplay or the more recent Google Mina provide an almost seamless, almost a human-like interactive experiences. Another impact on marketing is already noticed in advertising and advertising campaign. The current advertisements have more focus on individuals connecting with nature rather than celebrating in a crowd. If you recall, a few years ago, most advertisements used to feature flash mobs or some product display in a crowded music concert or a sports event. That has definitely not been the trend in the post-pandemic era. And there was a very big, large survey of about 3,000 chief marketing officers conducted by the Fuqua School of Duke University, and that was, that was very revealing. It showed for the first time that the main priority of chief marketing officers of these top companies, they identified as enhancing consumer experience rather than the usual new product development or something else. So this marks a significant shift. And other surveys have shown that the company's track record and positions on factors like sustainability, climate change, ethical sourcing, the DEI initiative, diversity, equity, and inclusion, those factors are also important as the earlier drivers like the quality of goods, prices, etc. So let me conclude my discussion with a brief taking a brief look at what are the risks. The risks are, there are risks and opportunities. So let me deal with the risks. But the McKinsey survey predicts that post-pandemic work situations likely to have the greatest impact on the most vulnerable section of the workers. That the workers whose workers are the workplaces which are already vulnerable, they are going to be hit. So, for example, the survey predicts that the impact of crisis likely to be adversely affect 4 times more women than the men, and 5 times for those without college degrees. And workers who are younger, between 15 and 24 age, are likely to be also much more negatively impacted. So there is also likely to be growth in the high-skilled job areas, and there will be, while there will decline in the low-skill areas. Now, this will definitely affect people who do not have those high-skill and job skills. And as we know, as much of the technology is digital, internet-driven, which not everybody has equal access to, it is likely to further widen, the digital divide, as you say, between the e-haves and e-have-nots, especially in developing nations. And as more data is shared online, more machine-to-machine conversation, the IoT we spoke about, there is bound to be concern about privacy issues. And another trend that has been taking roots, that it has been trending even prior to the pandemic, is the anti-globalization sentiment, especially in the Western world. There is this likely to give rise to more protectionist policies and adversely impact emerging economies that had benefited from globalization. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is that it's like a blessing in disguise. So there are some opportunities. The pandemic has made both workers and the employers rethink their priorities. Organizations will have to rethink how they devise their benefit situation, like granting sick leave, other benefits, and also include, that will also include part-time gig workers, people who are not permanent employees but work in your organization nevertheless. So employers, especially employees, now insist on a proper work-life balance that the organization has to consider in their human resources planning. As you know, like for a number of years, it was a hire and fire system that many companies adopted, thinking that workers will always come so long as we give them more pay. Now they are now really revisiting the whole concept that there has to be more, more holistic work-life balance. So there is now a greater emphasis on health, both physical and psychological. And I think this is the trend that's to be welcomed by anyone who is engaged in the work situation. Now, I conclude here, but before I do, these are some of the references I will include I've already shared my deck, my presentation deck, and you can find more. Look at that. So I'll conclude my presentation, and I'll be glad to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sandeep. Will you be so kind to, okay, you stop sharing, right? You stop sharing on your side.
I haven't stopped sharing, actually. No.
Please stop sharing. Okay.
I will. Okay.
Okay. And I wanted to be the host again. I mean, these women want to keep their power for as long as they can, right? So, okay. So here we go. Okay. So we are back, hopefully. Okay, so Professor Patnaik opened the floor for Q&A, and I already see a hand up. Anishwara, you have the floor. Anishwara, you are on mute.
Good evening, and thank you very much for the presentation. Really, really interesting. I mean, I had some thoughts, but this is really interesting. And I have two questions, and one refers to the slide which you presented related to the work and the workplace. Because I know that there are some discussions, or the question is, how should the countries prepare their laws, more or less, to follow up with this work and workplaces? Which are the trends in US in this direction? Because the people will work more and more from home, whatever it means.
Okay, so I can answer that, but do you have a second question so I can take both, maybe?
Yes, and the second question was related as well with working from home. Mm-hmm. And because you mentioned that the people are considering the well-being and be healthy, and with this pandemic, everything moved without, where it was possible for sure, moved just home without being prepared for this. The people are trying to put together their office, their monitor, but the companies, they were trying to help as well. But I think this is related with the first question. There are gaps which are coming from the point where the people will say who is paying for the electricity, till what is the company allowed to see in my apartment, because it's still my apartment and maybe I'm not living there alone. So these are the questions.
Sure. Okay, that's great. Before I answer the specific questions that you brought up, thank you so much for those insightful questions. Now, I must share with you a wonderful webinar that I recently heard, and the speaker who was an expert on the workplace situation made a point that I would like to share. And she said that working at a workplace was never really a part of the human history. It was mostly a post-industrial revolution one, when the large machineries were put up, so people had to come together by shifts and rotations. So the whole idea of going to a place and working, as opposed to doing your working at your home or working on your farm, was something which was post-industrial. So it is not something like we always did. So it was an interesting perspective, and I think that was interesting. The second point that had emerged was that a lot of companies used to insist people coming to the workplace because they were afraid that if people work from home, then they would slack off, that there will be effect on productivity. And so the three big enemies of working from home, I believe, was the bed, the television, and the fridge. That was identified as as impediment to any productivity. Now that has been, that whole thing has been, that myth has been busted. If anything, all the research that I have looked at, and there are lots of research out on including a very substantive, it was like a RCT, the rapid control experiment, testing environment in Stanford, which showed that people working from home actually worked at a minimum 2 hours more than the people who worked in office. And this is not including the useless meetings that you want us to attend just because you were there, and the commuting thing and so on. So there is a trend, especially there was always a trend even before the pandemic in highly densely populated areas in Shanghai or in San Francisco, where rent it's not possible to accommodate all the workers in a single building, either to rotate them or to have them work at home. But the fear was, okay, if we are losing on productivity, at least we are saving on rent. Now, the win-win for organization is that not only are they saving on rent, but they're also getting more productivity out of workers. Now, is it ethical? Nobody has been complaining, but as to your point, that if you let the work, the employer peek into your living situation, maybe provide their own machinery by computers, etc. There is always a privacy concern hidden with that. Who knows when your computer, phone, camera, somebody may hack into it, maybe switch on your cameras and so on. So there is always a flip side. Now, this may have, especially some workers, especially the elderly people with families, they probably welcome the idea of working from home, because then they can have, take care of the family situation as well as the work. But there is always a cost to it, which we do not really look at it in terms of utility cost, for instance. Now you have to keep the air conditioning or the heating system all the time. The utility bills goes up. The company doesn't pay for that. You need to have even the internet facilities. I mean, there's a lot of costs which the company would have otherwise borne, but now you have to, because you are working from home. Is there a legal safeguard to that? This is a very gray area. Companies, how much they should support to the workers when they actually not only working from home, but also working more, is something that has not been looked at. I think at some point this will have to be negotiated in the benefits package, in terms of their what kind of support, even it is like the psychological support. Sometimes, like if you're working from the same place with multitasking, looking after your kids, looking after the screen, and doing so many other things, it does exact a psychological toll as well. So unfortunately, there is not much in terms of legal protection, but this is definitely going to be an issue. Excuse me. And some universities, some organizations have tried to get ahead. I see that I read about some companies who are actually saying that no, you should not have any email exchanges after 5 p.m. Weekends are no. The Zoom meeting should exceed more than 45 minutes, and so on. So these are some of the prescriptions that have come about, but the application, whether there's a legal force of enforcement, I doubt it. But this will evolve as workplace evolve. So will the law will follow from that. I'm absolutely confident of that. But these are you brought out a really great point, because working from home seems attractive at first sight, but it also the downside is, and again I'm quoting from research, that many younger workers did not like working from home, because many of them, especially those who are single, the workplace was one of the best places to meet their future spouses, which typically was not surprising. But that's, again, I mean, that's perspective. People's families would rather be with their, take care of the other responsibilities. But if you're single, and basically, having a social life is also equally important. So this is still an evolving situation. So it'll be good to wait and watch.
Thank you. Vusala, you have a question?
Yes, good evening. I have a question regarding Anishwara's questions, actually. So what do you think, working from home can lead internationalization of the workforce in the future or not? And if working from home can lead internationalization of the workforce in the future, how would you estimate its impact on unemployment level? For instance, if Romanian companies decide to hire employees from all over the world because it's possible to work from home, it can affect unemployment level in Romania, right? How do you estimate this? What do you think about this?
Yes. So to start with, I feel that the internet is a great equalizer. So you don't have, once people have access to internet, so regardless of whether you are in the deepest part of Africa or India or China or whichever part, you have the same access to information, same access to maybe the digital library as somebody with resources, maybe in the West, who has access to an university. So the brick and mortar access to information, where you could just compartmentalize and protect it from people who do not pay, that has been to a great extent broken down. I would give an example of the Google Scholar, who just went, scanned so many documents and put it on free, so-called free, and that enabled the democratization of knowledge, and that enabled, I would see the India is a primary example where it was still struggling with a lot of poverty and underdevelopment, but because of the IT boom, you see so many people have come up the ranks. In fact, almost if you see Google, Microsoft, now Twitter, IBM, Adobe, they're all headed by people of Indian descent who actually grew up in fairly modest families in India with very little resources, but the digital technology, the internet technologies enabled them to rise up. But your second question about whether this will also threaten your job in Romania or yes, it's a two-way street. We can't just have the cake and have it too. There will be competition, but the advantage is that if you are in a sector where nobody knows Romania better than you. I'm just giving an example. So no American can replace you really, even if he or she may be very, maybe may have a little more qualification than you, maybe willing to work for cheaper than you are, but still nobody can replace. But you have also the knowledge of the ground realities there. So if you are working for a marketing firm, you don't have to read books to know what Romania is. You already know that, you have been there. So so that is where technology is heading to. So technology is no longer about coding. It is about looking for simulating a physical situation in a virtual world. So again, as I gave the example of a property real estate agency, yes, if you go on, anyone can be a real estate agent in selling houses in Romania, in Bucharest. I can also put up an account and say, okay, I'll get all the photographs and sell houses, but only you know which areas are good or bad, or where the schools are located and what is the traffic situation. So those kind of domain expertise can only come from somebody who has roots in the ground. And so I do not think that this will be a cause of concern and worry, so long as you have you add value to your own skill sets. You should be safe. And also, this is a brave new world. We can no longer be afraid of the future. Embrace it. That's the way to develop.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, one more question. Come on. I'm sure you have more questions. Well, until you make up your mind to ask your another question, Sandeep, I will avail myself of the opportunity to be sort of emceeing this part of our show, and try to pick your brain on something that really bothered me for some time. Remember, let's say, 20 years ago, when in our economics classes, especially macroeconomics classes, we were talking with the students, say, hey, if you want to acquire new medical equipment, it is better to lease it than to buy it, for the simple reason that the newer generation comes very soon. Now, very soon at that time was, 6 months. But now with the technology, if I blink and haven't checked the email one day, I am missing stuff, and I'm thinking of companies. How will they be able to train their employees or to provide means for personal development?
Excellent question. And that's where the challenge is, because people who have been, let's say, as we know, like when we were students, people who were in the computer field, people who are in the mainframe technologies, the COBOL coding suddenly became irrelevant, and C++ and Oracle later came in, and then so on. And then now it's lot of it is about visuals. The architecture is different, and so it's a constant reskilling effort, and it's not just the people who are developing it, but also people who are using it, right? So that is where the risk is that there will be workers who may be marginalized in the process. So unless, and that may not be due to their own fault. It is just that because the company is so intent, like make them so specialized that you just work on this software and not that. And suddenly one fine day, the company replaces software something else and say, hey, you are obsolete. You're no longer wanted, but let me get this fresh guy who knows this software. He or she can work cheaper than, the cost to the company is cheaper. And so you can replace them. But that is a sign of a bad company. And those companies, organizations, do not last very long, because very soon, even workers get the message that they are dispensable, and they will the word spread around. The internet again is such a powerful medium that the bad news about the company travels 7 times more faster than good ones. That's what. So I think and it doesn't really. That's not actually also a good strategy, because you have invested in the employee A so much time and effort training him or her, and then bringing another person just to replace him or her doesn't make economic sense. So how do good companies deal with it? So they try to make it a little more versatile training. So you are being exposed to a number of, even if you are not concerned with a specific package, you would just have a kind of it's good to know kind of thing, get them acclimatized. And the transition period is also stretched out, not just, overnight. So there is going to be a lot of, tweaking and modifying the human resource part of it. Most of the time, the human resources was nothing more than just a board out that office. They never really saw, they were just, engaged in hiring and firing and maybe promotions and benefits. They never really looked at manpower as a resource. Now they have to be much more involved in the process, that they have to take it. It's a journey that you are here with us. And so long as you are with us, we'll give you all the basic, all the facilities that for you to grow, so that you can be successful, not just with our company, but wherever you choose to go. And thanks to softwares, websites like Glassdoor, or, even the Burning Glass and the website, which actually, they have a lot of information. Reddit also has most of these work streams and threads. So workers exchange the opinion, what kind of a training environment, what kind of growth potential is there in this company. That is now a very big factor in younger people selecting their companies, rather than just going by the brands. And so that's the positive development. But your point, yes, we the change is much more faster. The workplace is much more dynamic, and so we also always work for have to be on our toes, and that's a good and bad thing. we can no longer rest on laurels, even as faculty, that just because I had produced this paper or done this 5 years ago, I'll still be having a job in the 5 years time. It's not going to happen. Those students who might be wanting to go into academics, for instance, now especially in the US, tenure was almost like everyone sought after tenure, because once you get a tenure, it's almost like a permanent job. Now, a majority of universities have done away with tenure. So you are as good as your last paper, you are as good as your last lecture, last class evaluation. So there is, I mean, one can, again, to it, as the previous student asked, should we be afraid of it? I don't think so, because this is a brave new world. I think we should embrace it, and you tell yourself that you're great, and you can't be beat. So you'll be fine.
This is an excellent note to end your contribution to our class, and really thank you very much for the time and for the substantive information.
So thank you, Christine, Professor Marine, for your introduction and for having me in your class. And I would also like to thank Professor Constantine, the Vice Provost, and the students of the Bucharest University of Economic Studies for attending this talk. In my presentation today, I propose to take a bird's eye view of a few business